folks can hear you.
So the reason I want to make certain I say it's a conversation is because as we go along, if there are questions you have, comments you want to make, points you want to make, feel free to do so. The intent this afternoon is to converse, not to present, okay? So very much focused this afternoon on a discussion about pathways into the teaching profession, but looking very critically at the systemic issues that have occurred over history that have led to the force out, screen out of teachers of color. I'm going to unpack that a little bit more in just a few moments, all right? My contact information is here. Always make certain that I share with people my contact information because I want you to continue the conversation. I don't believe in one-shot deals, right? This is an ongoing dialogue. So by all intent and purpose, feel free to follow up with me. Follow me on Twitter, all those good things, all right? And you'll see this at the end of the presentation as well. So if you don't capture it now, it's quite all right. So 3 things that I want to attempt to do today as I engage you in this conversation. Number 1, I want to talk a little bit more about the systemic diminishment of teachers of color in the United States of America via what we call white streaming. And I'll define that in just a few moments. Then we're going to discuss the impact of white streaming on recruitment, preparation, and retention of teachers of color via force out, screen out, keep out. And then finally, we're going to wrap up by talking about some explicit systemic level things that we can consider to combat white streaming, to try to ensure that we're preparing more teachers of color and retaining more teachers of color in our classrooms. I will make certain that I leave some time on the back end. I set my timer so I can make certain that I leave some time for additional dialogue on the back end so we can make certain we're good there. So if I have not had the pleasure of meeting you before, let me give you a very quick synopsis of who I am. I am Anthony Graham. I'm the Provost and Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at Winston-Salem State University. I'm in my 5th year as Provost there. Previously, I was the Dean of the School of Education at North Carolina A&T State University. I'm a former high school English teacher. Anybody from Guilford County? I taught at Western Guilford High School way back in the day. A long time ago. But I'm still an English teacher at heart. I currently serve as Governor Cooper's chairperson of the DRIVE Task Force, developing a representative and inclusive vision of education. Been doing that for quite some time. I'm also on the Pepsi Commission. If that's not enough, I'm on the board of directors for CAPE accreditation. I'm on the board of directors for the Deans for Impact. I'm on the board, you get the point, right? I stay busy, all right? So let me begin with a quote. I always tell people I am the child of a Southern Black Baptist pastor. I'm not going to keep you for 3 hours, so don't panic. But I will pass the collection plate at 2:35. But we were taught a long time ago that you begin a conversation by grounded in text. Okay? Now, I will not use the good book today. All right? But being a former high school English teacher, I am in love with literature and I'm in love with quotes. So I'm going to pull out for you a quote by Haim Janot, noted child psychologist, New York. Haim Janot says the following: I have come to the frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element. It is my personal approach that creates the climate. It is my daily mood that makes the weather. I possess a tremendous power to make a person's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, and an individual humanized or dehumanized. Catch these last 2 sentences, you all. If we treat people as they are, we make them worse. If we treat people as they ought to be, we help them become what they are capable of becoming. How you treating people? When you see people, are you treating them as they are today? Or do you see their potential in what they can become later? Are you treating them as what they can become, or are you fixating on what they are and what you see today? I'm going to come back to this quote as we go throughout this conversation. It works. All right. Thank you. We're good. Not a problem. All right. So I want to start off by operationalizing a term. I do not like using the term pipeline. I hear people talk about pipelines all the time. Pipeline is about inanimate things, oil, water, and so forth. When we're talking about preparing people for the profession, we're not talking about inanimate objects. We're talking about people, humans. It's a pathway, right? So throughout my conversation, I will use the language pathway. If other people choose to use pipeline, that's on them. But in this room today, this afternoon, it's all about pathway. The other thing about a pipeline, it implies or connotes that once that inanimate object is off the track, there's no way back. In our profession, we always have to find an exit ramp and an on ramp, right? So there should always be a way back. I'm going to talk more about that probably about 15 minutes when I show you a little bit of data, all right? So pathway, synonymous with pipeline for the purpose of this afternoon's conversation. I just don't like using pipeline. That's Anthony Graham, all right? So let's talk a little bit about history and understanding that what we do in the United States of America via our educational system has some historical underpinning, and a lot of it is grounded in some systemic issues. So let's unpack those systemic issues. First, let me, if you're not familiar, introduce you to the Cornerstone speech delivered in Savannah, Georgia, 1861. This speech is important because it establishes the philosophical belief that really undergirds what we do in our K-12 education system, quite honestly, education in general in the United States of America. This speech was delivered by Confederate Vice President Alexander Stephens. And a portion of his speech reads as follows. Our new government is founded upon exactly the opposite ideas as those of slavery foes. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition. This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth. The Cornerstone speech establishes the cornerstone philosophy that there are those who are inferior and those who are superior. It establishes the cornerstone belief that the system should be designed to advantage certain people and disadvantage others. So I start with this because oftentimes you hear people talk about systemic and structural racism, and they use the term synonymously. They are not synonymous. They mean two completely different things. Systemic racism is the philosophy. It's the cornerstone speech. It's the belief that there's a superior and an inferior, right? In order for this philosophy to take legs and operate, in order for this philosophy to have tentacles, in order for it to execute itself, it needs structures. Those structures may look like these: the educational system, the healthcare system, the governmental system, the financial system. All of these things are structures that prop up the philosophy, right? So these structures can be inherently racist. Supporting the system or the philosophy, going back to our cornerstone speech, that there's a superior and inferior, right? So from this point forward, when someone is talking to you and they start talking about systemic and structural racism and they're talking about it incorrectly, hold them accountable. Know better, do better, right? We've got to make certain that we're operationalizing terms so we can ensure that we're in the same space as we're having these conversations, right? So what I'm going to do in today's conversation, obviously, since we're here talking about educational issues, I'm going to zero in on the educational structure and how, as a system, It is propping up the systemic racist philosophy espoused by Alexander Stevens, this notion of our new government having a superior and inferior structure. So let's delve into education as an inequitable structure propping up that philosophy. So I always jokingly say that in the United States of America, long before FUBU was created in the 1990s, education was the original FUBU. It was created by a certain group of people for a certain group of people. Okay? So FUBU has a long history in this country. We just coined it in 1992. All right. The educational system was designed for or by white people for white people, with the intent of excluding anybody else. Right. So when you start looking at the educational structure and what undergirds and underpins what happens in education, the Protestant work ethic supports what occurs in the educational structure. A lot of our theoretical frameworks that occur in education, grounded and rooted in what happens in white ecosystems, right? A lot of the research that supports what we do in our K-12 systems and even higher education never conducted on people of color. They were primarily conducted on white boys. Or, if not white boys, anybody know the other group? Anybody? Animals. Animals. There was a belief, and still is a belief, this thing called equipotentiality. An animal will respond to a certain stimulus, and the belief is a human will respond to the same stimulus in the same way. So we will practice on animals to see how they respond to said stimulus, and then we make the assumption that humans will respond in similar ways. There's equal potential between the animal and the human, equal potentiality. Okay. So a lot of what we do in our K-12 and higher education was never intended for people of color. It was not designed for people of color. So when I hear people say, well, the system is broken, no. The system is designed to do exactly what it's doing, and I would argue it's one of the best systems ever designed because over centuries, it has excluded wholesale numbers of people successfully, and it continues to persist. That's one heck of a system. So what else do we know about our system of education? Well, we know right around 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, we attempted as a country to disrupt said system. Now, here's what we know about powerful people. When powerful people see that something has been disrupted and you're now threatening the power that I have, I'm going to recreate so that you cannot touch the power that I have. So although we had legislation that says we are now going to integrate our public schools, powerful white people, let me be explicit, said, what can we do to ensure that we retain our power? How can we ensure that we take that system that's been benefiting and advantaging us and ensure that it continues to do so? Because now they're wanting these black children and other children of color to come into our classrooms, but more importantly, they're wanting black teachers to come into our classrooms and teach our white children. We ain't gonna have that. So how do we ensure that we don't have it? Well, now you begin what we call the force out of teachers of color via white streaming. This normalization and mainstreaming of whiteness in our schools. So how do we achieve white streaming? Well, one way we go about achieving white streaming is we push out people of color who are classroom teachers. In the South, back in the 40s and 50s, nearly 50% of blacks listed teaching as their profession. After integration, you begin to see a decimation of black teachers being forced out of the profession. And not only forced out, but then kept out of the profession. If you want to come back into these classrooms, you have to pass an intelligent quotient test. What's your IQ? If you don't meet a certain score, then you can't enter the classroom to teach our children. Hold on to that, because we started doing that around 1969, the Sputnik era. It's 2022. We still do something similar that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But I want you to realize that nearly 38,000 African American teachers were fired in the South, and we have seen since that time a slow drip of individuals of color no longer allowed into the profession. What else do we do to white stream our K-12 curriculum, or what we do in our schools? Well, the Eurocentric curriculum. A lot of what we do is grounded in Eurocentricity. Textbooks that advantage a certain group of people and leave out other people, or if they include other people, they include them in a way that suggests lies, such that people of color, Black people specifically, enjoyed slavery. We were fed, taken care of. We enjoyed it. Standardized tests, well, you've got to norm reference those tests to someone. With which group do we norm reference? White people. That is the superior group, going back to Alexander Stevens, to which we must make all comparisons. Really? Pedagogical practices, as I talked about earlier, a lot of this research done on white boys with the intent of benefiting white people and what's occurring in the white ecosystem. Our classroom policies, school policies, our consequential systems, a lot of what we do rooted and grounded in that philosophical belief that there's a superior and inferior. White streaming. So we then should not be surprised with what the outcomes are. It blows my mind when people say, well, nearly 80% of our teachers are white. How is that happening? The system is designed to ensure that people on the back end are white. So why we're surprised is shocking to me. The other thing that research continues to show us is that the teaching profession is literally inherited. Literally inherited. Children of teachers are more than twice as likely to become teachers themselves. Well, if the profession is predominantly white, who do you think is going to be coming behind them? White people, right? We also see that this is true, interestingly enough, for daughters of Black and Hispanic teachers and sons of daughters of white teachers, but it is not true for sons of Black teachers. Black males stay away. Now, why is it that they stay away? I'll unpack that for you in just a few moments. And I can talk about it a little bit because I'm a Black male. In the state of North Carolina, in case you haven't seen this before, the majority of our classroom teachers are white, nearly 80%, but 53% of our students are students of color. Significant incongruence. But we tend to get fixated only on the classroom. I want us to understand that the entire educational system, the whole ecosystem is white. So principals, assistant principals, school counselors, TAs, white. School librarians, yes. Wow. And a lot of people don't think about our school librarians. That's critically important. When you start talking about how you bring reading and text into the classroom and into the school that is culturally responsive. These are new data shared by us by Dr. Tomberlin, so you can see our North Carolina K-12 teacher demography in very recent times, 2022, 23, thereabout. So you can see 69,000 of our teachers are white, 22,000 teachers are people of color. Significant divide. Even more concerning is the nosedive that we're seeing, where a lot of people, irrespective of race and ethnicity, not entering the classroom. Overall concerning. So let me talk to you a little bit about the preparation pathway. Let's look at our K-12 schools. So this is nationally. We are right now experiencing what we call the enrollment demography cliff, meaning our traditional age high school student is no longer electing 2-year, 4-year opportunities in higher education. Our high school juniors and seniors are now questioning the return on investment. Why would I go 2 years, 4 years, spending all this money on the back end? The salary may not be worthwhile. More importantly, we've done a very good job teaching our young people to be entrepreneurial. So much so that they're making more money using TikTok, YouTube, and other social media outlets than they would taking a full-time salaried position. So why bother going to a 2-year, 4-year if I can use TikTok, YouTube, and whatever else may be, and I can generate income right now? One of my good friends has a son he's a student at UNCG. He's a sophomore this year. He's taking his time through college though. Like he's not taking 12, 15 credit hours. He's literally taking a class or two a semester. But he's doing this TikTok stuff. And last year alone, he made over $400,000 via TikTok. And I'm starting to question my life choices. Yes.
Does that dip also include the increase in early college programs that have started? Like I've even heard of early colleges starting as early as middle schools, starting into that. So that also takes in consideration those programs?
It does. Okay. Yeah, because a lot of with the early colleges, they're still moving into college courses. So they're still enrolling in college. But yes, even with those numbers, we're seeing that dip. And we're expecting that dip to continue for the next 5 to 10 years. Here's another thing I want to share with you all. And then again, this is research verified. A few years ago, research study questioned the perceptions of teaching as a career pathway for high school students going off to college. So those students who were taking the ACT. That year, 1.9 million students took the ACT. Less than 5% of those students who were tested even expressed interest in the teaching profession. Less than 5%. And of those who did express interest, 70% of them were white. So again, the system perpetuating an outcome of inequity along race and ethnic lines. If that's not scary enough, what we know, our master's degree, bachelor's degree, conferral of education degrees dipped precipitously, a little bit of a rebound here recently, but still way down comparatively speaking. That's not enough for you. When we look at those who have completed their baccalaureate degree in education, 73% white, 42% black, 49% Hispanic. Again, significant variance. In North Carolina, our teacher preparation programs, many of you may already know this, bless you. If you look at our traditional teacher preparation programs in the state of North Carolina, whether public or private, matters not, 81% of those individuals who are enrolled in our ed prep programs, white. We see greater diversity through alternative pathways, but even there, primarily white. Here's a pathway trajectory. Between 2013 and 2017, in our teacher preparation programs in the state of North Carolina, our teacher prep programs admitted 14,000 plus white candidates. 79% of those candidates completed their degree program and became licensed. Within 2 years after attaining that license, 55% of that 11,272 in the classroom teaching. We lost 23%. Now let's look at what happens with people of color. Keep in mind this large number, 14,364 for our white candidates, 3,524 for our students of color. Only 67% completing the degree on the back end, and of that 67%, only 44% in the classroom within 2 years. We lost 23%. Smaller number of people starting out and losing them along the way. Now, the reason that I want us to keep focusing on pathways is because right now, There are 33% and 23% out there that could be reclaimed. Could be reclaimed. Now, for me, the larger issue is that how do we increase this number? This has to be the question that we continually ask ourselves. How do we increase that number? A little more context for you, in case I didn't depress you enough. Between 2010 and 2015, I want to share with you that there was an almost 18% decline in the enrollment of students in our teacher preparation programs at our UNC system institutions. So I'm not talking about our private independents here. I'm talking about the 15 programs public that have teacher prep programs. 18% decline, bachelor's and master's degree. Here's what people didn't talk about, though. And I've been beating this alarm and this drum for a long time, and I want to make certain you hear it and you're aware of it. When you look at all data and you don't disaggregate, sometimes you can miss the real story. This is a concern. I'm going to show you something that's larger than a concern. What happens when we look at our minority serving institutions alone? Pulling out those 5 or 6 MSIs in the state of North Carolina. Same time period. Here we go, you all. You ready? Elizabeth City State University, 57% decline. Fayetteville State University, 50% decline. North Carolina A&T State University, where I was dean at the time, 37% decline. I like to believe I had something to do with the smaller number. It's probably not true. North Carolina Central, 34.8% decline. UNC Pembroke, 36, and Winston-Salem State University, 67% decline. That's an average overall of almost 50%. 18% overall, 50% minority serving institutions. This is a perfect example of that old adage, when white America catches a cold, black America has the pneumonia. Yet, this is the very time that we're saying we need more teachers of color, but we're decimating what's appearing and occurring at the very places that produce the teachers of color we need. I'm gonna give you some hope. But before I give you hope, I want to make certain we paint reality. And I want to paint reality via data. Okay? It's not thinking and feeling and believing. I want to paint the picture of what's really happening. And the reason I wanted to share this screen with you all, because I want us to start asking really tough questions. Going beyond surface level presentation of data and digging into elements that impact our communities. If we don't operate along those lines, then we're missing a true concern. Yes, Tom.
This presentation, thank you. But I do wonder about institutions like where we're sitting right now, how much they put an emphasis on getting more professors of color in their colleges of education to attract the teachers of color. And I have felt that struggle at said university a number of different ways, and just like begging to teach an adjunct class. Yes. And being denied over and over and over again. So I also think higher ed has a lot to do with this, besides the recruitment numbers, but on the faculty side as well.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful point. I actually have a slide that talks, it's not in this presentation. I can share it later, but I believe, if I remember correctly, I may be misstating the numbers here, but in higher education, for your institutions, higher education, United States of America, 84% of our faculty are white. So it's very much reflective of what you see K-12. A lot of people think that what happens in K-12 just stops after 12th grade. No, it's a system. It sustains itself, community college, four-year institutions. It doesn't change. We tend to get fixated on K-12, but it's the same thing. So to your point, if 84% of your faculty are white, then that's what you're going to prepare and produce on the back end more than likely, okay? It's a system. So, possible reasons for these pathway challenges, and I'm going to start moving us toward conclusion here and trying to give you a little bit of hope. So, we know without question that a lot of the reasons why we lose our teachers of color, unfortunately, is because of what we see occurring in our K-12 schools. We know that 24% of our teachers of color leave at a higher rate than their peers. And when you start unpacking why, oftentimes you find what we call the devaluation and disrespect. Okay. Racial microaggressions, isolation, people being questioned pedagogically, people being silenced, people being disenfranchised and marginalized, or people giving more to do. It's what we call the black tax. When I taught at Western Gifford High School, I was given, and my principal told me when she hired, this was the language she used, black principal, by the way, I'm going to give you the bottom of the barrel students because I believe you can connect with them and move them. And then I'm going to have you also do some work in the in-school suspension area. And whenever there was a fight in the hallway, who did they call? Right. So not only am I teaching my students, but I've got all this extra stuff to do, and I'm getting nothing in return: compensation, additional time off, none of that. It's the black tax. And what's my reward for doing a good job? I give you more the next year. I didn't even get a certificate. You did such a fantastic job. We're going to do the same thing next year. We're going to give you a little bit more. And sadly enough, and I hate to admit this in front of you all, 18 months and I was out. I couldn't take it. You're reading 150 essays. I'm trying to teach students how to write a sentence and then how to write a paragraph and how to write an essay. And I'm doing all this other stuff. And I'm being questioned along the way by a black principal. So I don't want us to believe that it's always this white-black thing. It is always not a white-black thing. I found sometimes some of my own people make it a little more difficult for me than some of others. Just saying. Just saying. We also know that there are these exorbitant costs associated with becoming an educator. First of all, just getting to college, if you're a person of color, you're probably going to take out more loans than your counterparts. High interest rate loans that will take a lifetime to pay back. And depending on your profession, it may take 2 lifetimes to pay back. And if you begin to really unpack what it costs for a candidate in an educator preparation program, in addition to tuition and required fees, these are additional fees that don't get added into your tuition and fees cost of attendance. Licensure exams, practice core exams. If I'm having to travel out to early field experiences, and I'm going to take that point. Hold on to what she just said. I'm going to take that in like 5 minutes and go into a little bit more, because not passing and having to take the exam multiple times is a thing. I met a student when I first arrived at Winston-Salem State University, black male. He had taken the practice core exam 12 times. $150. 12 times. And he didn't want to give up on it because he wanted to be a teacher. He was committed to it. I said, brother, let's talk. Yep. So if you kind of take all of this, and I realize some of these things are estimates, but it can cost about $13,000, $14,000 between your freshman year to the point in which you graduate, in addition to your tuition and fees. And then we've got this over-reliance on our test scores. This is what we call the screen out. Now, normally, if I had enough time, I would actually give you all a part of the practice core exam so you can see what it's like if you've never taken it. I don't have enough time today. But I want you all to see, these are data coming directly from Educational Testing Services, the organization that's responsible for constructing the Praxis Core exam. And I want you to see how our students of color have performed, particularly our African American and Hispanic students. In case you're not familiar with Praxis Core, it's very similar to the SAT in some ways. It's 3 tests, math, reading, writing. And then there are cut scores established by states. There are 33 states right now that leverage the Praxis Core in some shape, form, or fashion. Every state determines its cut score and what that cut score is. So when we look across all institutions of the students who took this exam, you can see the significant performance gaps between white students and our African American Hispanic students. And then when you come to our minority serving institutions and zero in there, you can see the performance gaps there as well. The reason this is problematic is twofold. Number one, remember that end that I showed you earlier for people of color, where it was only 3,400 some change being admitted into teacher preparation programs? The greatest issue is the Praxis Core. Students not passing the Praxis Core to be admitted through our traditional pathway. Here's why it's an issue. And this is coming from a person who's on the board at the Educational Testing Services. So I can talk about my people. I talked about them when I was there. This Praxis Core exam tells us absolutely nothing about your ability to be a teacher several years downrange. It tells us nothing about your effectiveness. It tells us nothing about whether or not we will retain you in the profession. There are no correlational statistics that exist at present that tell us anything about what you will become downrange as a classroom teacher. So that begs the question, why do we have it? You remember that screen that I showed you at the beginning of this presentation about how educational structures are designed to kind of prop up a systemic philosophy and to force out certain people and keep out certain people? Hello. That philosophy that started with integration in the 50s and really came to bear through testing in the 1960s, we have never let it go. And we refuse in 2022 to let it go. And it tells us nothing. Yet we continue to put in place these types of requirements, is the language we use. And these requirements tell us nothing. I continue to tell people we confuse multiple steps with rigor. We think by having more and more steps, the process is more rigorous. No, there are more steps. As a former classroom teacher, I tell you, I can make something rigorous. I can make one assignment rigorous. I don't need multiple assignments. I can do one assignment that's very rigorous. In education, there's this thing called additive bias. I wish I had more time with you all. There's a lot of activities I like to do. There's this thing called additive bias. So if there are 5 steps to something, and if we see that there are issues with that process, we unpack those 5 steps. We think, okay, the way we fix the process is by doing what? Adding more steps. It is our human nature to add more than it is to subtract. And by adding more, we end up putting in place more barriers, rather than thinking, how do we streamline and perhaps reduce the steps? Additive bias. Look it up. Very interesting. The other thing I want to share with you, moving beyond Praxis Core, if we look at the first-time pass rates on the mathematics elementary licensure test, 53% test takers who passed the exam on first attempt, 15% walked away after the first failed attempt, 26%, almost 30% walked away if they were of color. Take it one time, I don't do well, okay, that's enough for me, I'm out. All right, so let me wrap up here. I like to share this quote. I was on a panel with John Jackson back in 2013 when I was at A&T. John is, besides my frat brother, he's president and CEO of the Schott Foundation. And he said this quote, and I jotted it in my notepad, and I use it every time I get a chance. John said, "We're not going to program an initiative our way out of this mess. This is a systems issue that requires political and budgetary courage." The reason I shared this quote with you is because oftentimes our solution to these types of problems are to come up with programs and initiatives. It's a systems issue. A program and initiative is not going to be the solution. It might help in the immediacy, but here's what we know about programs and initiatives. Oftentimes they're aligned with a person's interest. If I'm a superintendent and I believe in this program, let's stand it up. We'll put the money behind that initiative. Oh, the superintendent has been let go 2 years later. That program and initiative that we stood up, there's now a new superintendent in place who says, why we spend money on this? Let's reallocate those dollars. That program, that initiative gone. Programs and initiatives go with people's interests. Things that are built into the DNA and the cake, much more difficult to undo. We have to think more about policies and what we do by way of regulations and so forth. So some things that we need to consider doing, and I don't have time to unpack all of these, but as we think about policies and budgetary appropriations, share with you earlier this notion of how much it costs for people of color relative to loans to go to college. We have to find ways to make college more affordable, and it must be written into our policies and regulations. Alternative certification pathways appear to be a way that diversifies our K-12 teacher workforce a great deal more. If that's the case, then we need to invest more money in those pathways. We also know teacher residency models, based on research that we're learning with these programs over the last 10, 15 years, significant impact in terms of teacher effectiveness, in terms of teacher retention, and in terms of K-12 student learning. We need to invest a great deal more. Our state needs to invest a great deal more in these teacher residency models. Now, why am I harping on the teacher residency model? Because I shared with you earlier the percent of students, white or otherwise, who are not making it into the classroom, although they could be in the classroom. The teacher residency model could be a pathway on-ramp to bring them back. Right? Now, I will tell you, pathway or the residency model is expensive. It's extremely expensive. And to my knowledge, as of today, there are only 5 teacher residency programs that exist in the state of North Carolina, all of which are funded by federal dollars from the United States Department of Education. There's one at North Carolina A&T. I wrote the grant before I left, so I know it's there. There's one at A&T in partnership with High Point University. There's one at UNCG. There's one partnerships in UNC, but it works in Durham County, the DREAM program. And then we just wrote one at Winston-Salem State University. Those are the only 5 of which I'm aware. But these are multi-million, multi-year grants. Those dollars will eventually end. How do we sustain? Yes. Wake County has one now, so 6. But again, they're all in large urban areas. I'm from little Kinston, North Carolina, Lenoir County. Ain't nothing down there. Grow your owns, eliminating these tests, and then holding districts accountable, requiring that they do these diversity key performance indicators, and updating our North Carolina professional teaching standards. This is important because right now the pressure and the onus tends to be on our minority serving institutions to prepare students of color for the K-12 classroom. We must hold our majority institutions equally as accountable. Going back to your earlier point, if you're not forcing me to pay attention to it, then why would I? So we have to force, through accountability, all institutions to pay attention to this if we truly believe it is an imperative. And this is an imperative. Let me wrap up because I'm running out of time here. I'll skip that slide. So I will end right where I started. And I end with this quote because I need for you all to understand the agency that each of you has individually and that we have collectively. I have come to the frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element. It is my personal approach that creates the climate. It is my daily mood that makes the weather. I possess a tremendous power to make a person's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or heal in all situations. It is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated and an individual humanized or dehumanized. If we treat people as they are, we make them worse. If we treat people as they ought to be, we help them become what they are capable of becoming. I need for us individually and collectively to treat people as what they're capable of becoming and think about how we attack these systems from that lens, an assets-based lens, not a deficit lens. Thank you all very much for your time.